The Galactic Concorde's High Council chamber fell into a stunned silence. The air shimmered with tension as the massive holographic display projected the aftermath of what should have been humanity's final battle. The footage played on an endless loop, an impossible, defiant act that no species in the council chamber could comprehend. At the center of the image was the wreckage of a planet-sized battleship, its once pristine hull now torn apart and drifting through the void. Surrounding it were the scattered remnants of an entire fleet, twisted metal and shattered war machines floating like debris in a dying star's orbit. This was the remains of the iridescent Dawn, the flagship of the Zirac Dominion, the most advanced warship the Concorde had ever seen, indestructible, or so they had thought, and yet it was gone. The recording continued, shifting to the final moment of the battle. A battered human battleship, the Sovereign, stood alone against the Dominion's entire fleet. Its hull bore the scars of countless assaults, energy shields flickering on the brink of collapse. Its weapons were drained, its engines sputtering. The battle should have been over. Then the Sovereign spoke, not in surrender, not in desperation, but in something the Concorde had never expected from a species so young, so reckless. A voice, raw with defiance, thundered across the war-torn expanse. Of space, you think you've won. You haven't even begun to understand what a human battleship can do. The Concorde's highest-ranking officials watched in disbelief as the Sovereign executed a maneuver that defied all known logic. The ship surged forward, burning through what little power remained in its failing core. The enemy had disabled its weapons, stripped it of its defenses, and left it for dead. And yet, in that final moment, humanity did what no one expected. It detonated, not as a last-ditch act of self-destruction, but as a perfectly calculated, impossibly precise tactical maneuver. The ship's reactor collapse created a cascading singularity, a controlled, gravitational implosion that turned the battlefield into a nightmare. Zirac warships were torn apart as they were dragged into the anomaly. The iridescent Dawn stood. No chance. The battle was over. And for the first time in recorded galactic history, the Zirac Dominion learned fear. The transmission ended. The council chamber remained silent. One of the elder aliens, a being whose species had ruled the stars, for millennia, finally spoke. Their voice was unsteady. By the void, they didn't just fight, they spoke. A younger official, still struggling to process the carnage, turned toward the gathered leaders. What do we do now? No one had an answer, but they all understood. One thing, humanity was no longer just another species in the galaxy. They were something else entirely, and the stars would never be the same. The Galactic Concorde had always believed itself to be the governing force of civilization, a collection of the most advanced and ancient species. Bound by laws older than most stars, they dictated peace, war and progress, and yet, despite all their power, they had failed to predict the rise of humanity. The council chamber remained, eerily silent in the wake of the Sovereign's final transmission. The assembled leaders, representing the most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy, struggled to process what they had just witnessed. The Zirac Dominion, the Council's unchallenged enforcers, had been humiliated. Their fleet, the largest and deadliest armada ever assembled, had been reduced to scrap. Their flagship, the iridescent Dawn, a vessel that was supposed to be indestructible, was now nothing more than drifting wreckage, all at the hands of the Sovereign, a single human battleship that had no right to be standing in the first place. Councillor Vark of the Zirac Dominion clenched his mandibles in barely contained fury. His species had been at the forefront of galactic warfare for centuries. They were the ones who maintained order through force. Their technology was superior, their battle doctrine was absolute, and yet they had been outwitted. He turned to the other members of the council, his crimson eyes flashing. This This is what happens when we allow primitives to play at war, he spat. Humanity should have been eradicated long before they reached the stars. We underestimated them once. We cannot afford to do so again. Across the table, another figure shifted. Ambassador Lyrian of the Keltari Dominion, a species known for their strict adherence to logic, tapped his clawed fingers against the polished surface of the council table. You speak of extermination, Vark, but that battle tells us something far more dangerous than simple defiance. The humans are unpredictable. They are willing to sacrifice everything, for victory. No species has ever fought like this before, not even your own dominion. The chamber buzzed with murmurs. The humans had not fought conventionally. They had spoken through destruction, through defiance, through sheer, unrelenting ingenuity. The Sovereign's final maneuver wasn't just an act of desperation. It was strategy, a suicidal gambit designed to do the impossible. And it had worked. Councillor Marvix, an elder of the Sirak Corps, one of the founding species of the Concord, leaned forward. His aged voice was weighted with concern. We assumed they would break under pressure, that their fledgling civilization would see reason in the face of overwhelming force. But humans, they do not break. We must ask ourselves, is this a species we can control, or have we created something far more dangerous than we ever anticipated? Beyond the chamber, deep within the heart of human-controlled space, the sovereign sacrifice had already become legend. Admiral Elias Verin stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, a second-generation battleship currently stationed at the edges of what was now contested territory. His weary eyes stared at the holographic projections of the battlefield, his fists tightening as the details of the battle replayed before him. They thought we would kneel, that we would surrender like cowards. They thought wrong. Verin turned to his officers, men and women who had witnessed the full scale of the Dominion's cruelty. He had no illusions about what came next. The Zirak would not accept this defeat quietly. They would return with greater force, with more ships, with a hunger for revenge that would make this war even deadlier. We proved something today, Verin said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-fought battles. We proved that humanity will never go quietly, that no matter how advanced they think they are, no matter how powerful their weapons may be, they will never silence us. His officers nodded, their faces hardened by the knowledge of what was to come. One of them, Captain Dawn, let out a dry chuckle. Damn right. Let them come. They'll never understand what it means to fight us until it's too late, Verin allowed, himself the smallest of smirks. The war wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The aftermath of the Sovereign's last stand rippled across the galaxy. The Galactic Concord, once content to dismiss humanity as an upstart species with no place in interstellar affairs, now faced an uncomfortable truth. Humans were not just survivors. They were something else entirely, and the Zirak Dominion wanted vengeance. 2 weeks after the destruction of the iridescent dawn, the Zirak struck back. Their fleet tore through the contested border systems like a wildfire. Entire planets, military, outposts and orbital defenses were reduced to smoldering wreckage. The Dominion's message was clear. Humanity would pay for its defiance. Admiral Elias Verin watched the reports flood in, his jaw tightening as the hollow map of human-controlled space burned with fresh Zirak incursions. The Indomitable had been forced into a defensive position alongside what little remained of the fleet. The Concorde had refused to intervene. This war, they claimed, was a reckoning for humanity's reckless defiance. They want to test us again? Fine. But this time, they won't just regret underestimating us. Verin turned to his senior officers, standing around the war table. They think they can break us by pushing us into a corner, but they still don't understand how humans fight. Captain Dawn crossed his arms. You mean dirty? Verin let a small, grim smile tug at his lips. I mean smart. The Xirac war doctrine was simple: overwhelm the enemy, dominate them with superior firepower, and force them into submission. Every war they had fought ended the same way. They marched in, crushed resistance, and left nothing behind but ashes. But humans had learned from their history. The days of fighting in predictable formations were long gone. If the Xirac wanted a war, they would get one unlike anything they had ever seen. Verin's plan was bold. Instead of engaging in direct fleet battles, the humans would employ asymmetric warfare, hit-and-run strikes, disruptive tactics, psychological warfare. Xirac expected a conventional war. Humanity would give them chaos. The Indomitable led the charge, targeting Xirac supply lines and communication hubs instead of engaging their main battle fleets. Human forces scattered, launching simultaneous strikes across multiple sectors, forcing the Dominion to spread. Their forces thin. Deep in Xirac-controlled space, a Dominion dreadnought, the Vorka, patrolled a supply corridor when its sensors detected an anomaly, an empty battlefield. Wreckage from a previous skirmish. Drifting ships, some still intact, a prize waiting to be claimed. Commander Shul, the Xirac officer in charge, sneered as he observed the derelict human vessels floating in the darkness. Their energy signatures were cold, dead. The battle had clearly been lost days ago. Scan for survivors, he ordered. If there are any left, I want them as prisoners. The ship's scanners swept the wreckage. No life signs. Satisfied, Zul signaled the rest of his fleet forward, moving into the debris field. That was when the trap was sprung. The wrecked human ships flared to life, engines igniting in the void. They were not abandoned. They were waiting. Before the Xirac could react, hidden mines activated, detonating in a chain reaction that crippled their formation. Ion cannons fired from the human vessels, targeting engines and shield generators instead of outright destruction. Within moments, the Xirac warships were disabled, stranded in the debris field. A single transmission crackled through the void. This is the human fleet. You are no longer hunters, you are prey. With precision strikes, the Vorka and its escorts were systematically torn apart. The Dominion's supply lines in the sector collapsed overnight. The Xirac were relentless, but humans had discovered something about them, a weakness. Xirac soldiers relied on strict hierarchy and absolute discipline. They had no concept of deception in war. Misdirection was a tactic beneath them. Humans, however, thrived on it. Across multiple systems, human forces began broadcasting distorted signals into Dominion-held territory. Battle cries from the sovereigns. Final stand, it started as echoes in their comms, a voice they had thought was gone. You think you've won. You haven't even begun to understand what a human battleship can do. At first, the Xirac dismissed it as interference. Then ships reported hearing it directly over their communication channels. Officers swore they saw ghostly signatures appearing on their radars, phantom readings of the sovereign appearing and vanishing without a trace. Morale plummeted. Some Xirac captains refused to advance without confirmation that the sovereign wasn't still out there. Others hesitated in battle, fearing a trap, and then the real ambushes began. In one instance, a Dominion fleet charged into a seemingly undefended human sector, only to find themselves surrounded by dozens of smaller vessels hidden within asteroid fields. They were picked off one by one, their confusion turning into desperation. The final blow came not from the battlefield, but from within the Xirac themselves. The Dominion's ruling war council, frustrated by their inability to crush humanity, convened in secret to discuss a final decisive strike. They never made it out alive. A human strike team infiltrated their war summit on the planet Vorak Prime, disabling security systems and sabotaging their communication network. In one night, the Dominion's entire high command was either eliminated or thrown into chaos. By the time the remaining Zirac leaders re-established order, their war machine had begun to collapse under its own weight. The Galactic Concord observed humanity's counter-offensive with growing unease. This was not a species that could be intimidated. They did not play by the rules of conventional warfare. Humanity had taken the Zirac's thirst for conquest and turned it against them. Counselor Marvix watched the reports flood in, his hands trembling. "They are more than warriors," he whispered. "They are something else." For the first time in recorded history, an enemy had shattered the Dominion's war doctrine, and now the entire galaxy knew the truth. Humanity was not just another species to be conquered. They were something far, far more dangerous. The Zirac Dominion was bleeding. Their fleets were in disarray. Their war council was shattered. Their soldiers, once feared across the galaxy, were now hesitant, second-guessing every order. But the war was not over. Not yet. Desperate to reclaim their dominance, the Dominion gathered what remained of their forces for one final decisive battle. If they could crush the humans in one overwhelming strike, perhaps they could still salvage their reputation. And so, the Battle of Orion's Veil began. The battlefield was a sector of space known as Orion's Veil, a vast expanse of unstable nebulae, electromagnetic storms, and gravity wells that made long-range targeting unreliable. The Zirac believed the humans would avoid such treacherous terrain. They were wrong. Admiral Elias Verin stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, gazing at the tactical display. The Zirac had committed everything to this engagement. Hundreds of warships, planetary bombardment cruisers, dreadnoughts, and siege carriers. They were willing to burn entire worlds if it meant breaking humanity's will. Verin took a slow breath. This was it. The moment that would decide the fate of humanity. "All ships," Verin commanded, "engage," and the battle erupted. The human fleet moved like nothing the Zirac had ever encountered before. They did not fight in tight formations or predictable patterns. They weaved through the nebula's distortions, vanishing and reappearing in the storm's interference, striking like ghosts. The Dominion's flagship, the Wrath of Vorak, unleashed its main cannon, a weapon capable of shattering moons. But the humans had anticipated it. They baited the shot, sacrificing a decoy ship, then counterattacked from the nebula's shadow. Missiles rained down from hidden positions. Ionized gas clouds ignited, creating blinding explosions that masked human movements. Ships that the Zirac thought destroyed suddenly came back online, having played dead just long enough to ambush their pursuers. The Zirac war doctrine, built on brute strength and intimidation, was failing. They had no counter to unpredictability, no answer for humanity's ingenuity, and then, the moment that changed everything. A voice echoed across the battlefield, broadcasted through every Dominion ship, overloading their communications, forcing every Zirac to hear it. It was the voice of the Sovereign, of, "You thought we were finished. You thought we would kneel. You thought we were like every species before us, but you never understood what a human battleship can do." The Dominion forces hesitated. Fear crept into their ranks. And at that exact moment, the humans struck with their final gambit. The Indomitable, accompanied by a fleet of fast attack ships, charged toward the Wrath of Vorak. The Dominion fleet scrambled to react, but it was already too late. Human engineering had done something impossible. The Indomitable had been fitted with a prototype Gravlance, an experimental weapon designed to manipulate the unstable gravity. Wells of Orion's Veil. As Verin gave the order, the Gravlance fired. A singularity erupted just beyond the Dominion's flagship, a micro-black hole, barely stable, collapsing in on itself. The gravitational ripples sent shockwaves through the battlefield. The Wrath of Vorak's engines failed as it was pulled toward the anomaly, its shields unable to compensate for the sudden shift in gravitational forces. the most powerful warship. In the Dominion, the last symbol of their military supremacy was being swallowed whole. Zirac officers screamed, abandoning ship, escape pods jettisoned, and in its final moment the wrath of Vorak received one last transmission. "This is Admiral Elias Verin of the Human Defense Force. We're not here to conquer you, we're not here to rule you, but we will never be your prey again." The flagship disappeared into the singularity, and with it the war was over. The Dominion's remaining ships, leaderless and terrified, scattered. Some surrendered, some fled to deep space, never to return. For the first time in recorded history, the Zirac Dominion had lost. Across the galaxy, the Galactic Concord watched in stunned silence. The humans had done the impossible. They had taken a war meant to destroy them and turned it into their greatest triumph. And now, every species in the universe understood a singular truth. Humanity was not to be underestimated. The war was over. See, once mighty Zirac Dominion lay in ruins, their fleet shattered, their war council in disarray. No species had ever defied them so completely. No species had ever dared to fight them on such impossible terms. No species until humanity. In the aftermath of the Battle of Orion's Veil, the Galactic Concord reconvened, this time not to decide humanity's fate, but to acknowledge an undeniable reality. Councillor Marvix of the Zirac Corps stood before the assembly, his ancient features heavy with thought. The Zirac believed humanity was weak. We believed humanity was reckless. And now we stand in the wake of a war that has reshaped the balance of power in this galaxy. He glanced around the chamber, watching as even the most war-hardened species hesitated to speak. "What do we do now?" asked a younger councillor. Silence. Then Ambassador Lyrian of the Keltari Dominion leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "We extend a hand," he said simply. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "You would suggest an alliance?" Vark of the Zirac snarled, his pride barely allowing him to speak. Lyrian nodded. An alliance. Acknowledgement. A warning, if nothing else. "We can either work with them, or wait until another species makes the mistake of thinking they can control them." It was not a question of if humanity would rise further. It was only a question of whether the Concord would accept it or be forced to confront it, and no one wanted to test the latter. Back in human-controlled space, Admiral Elias Verin stood aboard the Indomitable, staring at the stars. The battle was won, but war always left scars. Captain Dorn approached, arms crossed. "We did it," Dorn said. "Hell, we did more than that. We just made sure no one in the galaxy ever looks at us the same way again." Verin exhaled. "That's what worries me," Dorn frowned. "You think they'll come for us again?" Verin shook his head. "No, I think next time it won't be war. It'll be something more subtle. Alliances, political maneuvering. Attempts to use us instead of destroy us. The Zirac tried brute force. Someone else will try something smarter." A pause. Then Dorn smirked. "And we'll be ready for that too." Verin chuckled softly, but there was steel in his voice when he responded. "Damn right we will." Across the galaxy, news of the war's end spread. Some feared humanity, some admired them, some saw them as a force to be reckoned with, and in the depths of space, one last signal echoed, sent from an unknown source. "To the species of the galaxy, you thought you had the last word. Until the human battleship spoke, the transmission ended, and the galaxy listened. End."